What is up, guys? Frosty 0232 here today for another Frosty Features. I had some computer trouble today, so we're not doing this one live. We're doing this one. This is our first one offline. Today, we are doing Frosty Features Mister Negative. New player coming, our new character coming to Marvel Strike Force. If you haven't been here for Frosty Features before, what we do is we go into a comic dive into the new characters coming to Marvel Strike Force, so you know who you're playing. You have the story behind the character, the tune that you are playing. And today, once again, we are diving in to Mister Negative, our central figure to our new Underworld team coming out soon here on Marvel Strike Force. So with all that being said, strap in and let's get started. As a reminder, I typically stay in the Marvel 616 canon storyline, and that's what we're going to be talking about all the way through with Mr. Negative. Alright, Mr. Negative, there's the man, the myth, the legend right there. And we start off with a name, and in this case, it is unknown in comic canon and anything else you may run into Mr. Negative. His actual name is not known, nor has ever been revealed as of the recording date right now. We'll dive into it a little bit later. Everyone knows him as Martin Lee, but that is actually not his name. It is something that it is a name that he kind of takes. And with a lot of crime lords, he's big in taking things. First appearance, Free Comic Book Day 2007, Spider-Man. So, for those of you who don't read comics and don't know anything about the comic world, there is always a day, once a year, that there are free comic books. And you can go into any comic book store, pretty much in the nation, I believe, and they will literally give you whatever that day's issues are for free. So, sometimes different lines will come out with like one-shots, or they'll just have like a little thing that's a little offshoot of a main storyline, so you can go in and get a free Spider-Man, you can go in and get a free Batman, whatever. Marvel, DC, even some other lesser known companies and such, you can always get a free comic book. And in this situation, Mr. Negative was introduced on Free Comic Book Day, which is really cool, because I don't actually think I didn't really know that a lot of characters got introduced on those specific issues, but this is really cool. So, Free Comic Book Day 2007, Spider-Man. Powers and abilities. So, Mr. Negative's powers and abilities are kind of all over the place, especially for a Spider-Man villain, but they are, he's very strong, and they're very cool. So, he uses the Dark and Light Force, and in that, he can do a moderate shape-shifting, and then he uses a corrupting touch and a healing touch. A corrupting touch, he can touch people and make them essentially carry out their whim. His whim, he can, essentially, he enslaves people and uses them like that, and he can also heal people by touching them. This is very similar to Cloak and Dagger, and as we'll talk about in a minute, Mr. Negative has essentially all of, uses the same power source as both Cloak and Dagger. But he can use them as one person, but he doesn't use them at the same time. So that's kind of a big part of Mr. Negative. Aliases Martin Lee and Negative Man. So Negative Man, Mr. Negative, that is his crime lord persona. Martin Lee is his philanthropic, nice guy kind of guise, but also personality. Affiliations, Feast, various organized crime syndicates, including the Inner Demons, the Dragon Lords, etc. So he's sort of in all sorts of different crime conglomerates that work together. They work together or sometimes against each other. He actually does, he's a part of one, and then he leaves that one and starts another one, gets in another one, and kills the other one. You just don't get in his way at the end of the day. And then Feast is an organization that he puts together. For those of you that played the Spider-Man game that first came out on PS4, Mr. Negative is central to the plot, and Feast is it's a organization for less fortunate people, homeless people, and stuff like that. So as Martin Lee, Mr. Negative he's a very kind and caring person, and he wants to help people. Background. So, Mr. Negative, before he was Mr. Negative, before he had a name, he was working with the Snakehead gang in China. And so what the way that worked, so he's working with the Snakehead gang in China. So this is his backstory. Here we go, right? So, unknown man working with the Snakehead gang in China. So what they would do, they'd be like, hey, you want to go somewhere else? We can get you somewhere else. You pay us money. We'll take you to America. We'll take you to London, whatever. Get on our boat and we'll take you over there. So what they would do is they would smuggle people, but that's what they would think they were doing. And so they would smuggle people, and then when they would get them on the ship, they would take them to a port, and then they would sell them. So they would have the people, essentially, the Snakehead gang would have people pay them to sell them into slavery. So they would pay them because they thought they were going somewhere new, and then the Snakehead gang would kind of divert, and they sell them off to whoever wants to buy them as slaves, or in this very specific experiment or situation, selling them to be experimented on. So they are on a boat they're heading to the US, and there's a large storm, and everything crashes or whatever, and the man, soon to be known as Martin Lee, takes the names of one of the slaves so that he can kind of he can operate under that pseudonym and not be harmed or whatever. So he gets off the wrecked boat. He's working under his pseudonym or what have you, and he goes to find the local branch of Snakehead, the Snakehead gang, just to arrive and find out that all the Snakehead gang has been killed by the Magia family, and he gets captured and sold into slavery like the people on the boats he was originally trying to kind of do over. And so this is as Martin Lee now. So he takes the name, and it doesn't really help him much. That's how he gets around, as he introduces himself as Martin Lee or whatever. He gets sold to he gets taken in and sold to the Magia family, who is working on a drug. So let's see what the next thing is. Okay, cool. So they are working on a drug. It is a cheaper, more addictive version of heroin. And, but all they know is they've made a drug and they want to experiment on it. So what they've been doing is buying these people and testing it on them. And it's called D-Lite. So in this, only 3 people survive D-Lite. That'd be Tyrone Johnson, Tandy Bowen, and our Martin Lee at the time. For those of you savvy, Tyrone Johnson and Tandy Bowen are Cloak and Dagger, and Mr. Negative being the third. So they are imbued with Dark Force and Light Force powers. Tyrone getting obviously Dark Force, Tandy getting Light Force, and then Mr. Negative getting both. So they're actually all inflicted with this at the same time. So eventually Cloak and Dagger escape, and under their escape, Mr. Negative escapes. So when he has his darkness and lightness powers, he changes in between 2 personalities. So he has a Jekyll and Hyde aspect to him. Jekyll being the Martin Lee persona, and Hyde being the Mr. Negative persona. So the fact that he didn't use a name before actually didn't matter, because when the D-Lite situation kind of came to him, he became Martin Lee personality wise, and then his other personality being Mr. Negative. In this whole situation, he does assume Martin Lee, the real Martin Lee, was trying to go to the United States to be reunited with his wife. So this Martin Lee, Mr. Negative, taking over his identity, was using that as part of his cover, and actually ends up seeking out the wife to help further kind of sell his persona as Martin Lee. So Martin Lee uses, he kind of does it subconsciously, but he uses Light Force, his Light Force powers to heal people. So in opening and operating Feast, as sick people come to him or homeless people come to him, they feel empowered, or they slowly become cured. they slowly become cured from just being around his presence. It makes him better. And when he is Mr. Negative, he uses that dark force power. He controls people's minds. He can, make them sick, make them feel negative, if you will. But some really good examples of that difference between the darkness and the light is through the darkness, he kind of founds his different crime organizations. One of the main ones being the White Dragons. So he ends up actually kind of going and joining the White Dragons, rising to the top super fast, and then killing everybody in the Snakehead gang that's left in both the United States and China. He kind of Mr. Negative is the crime lord, and then as Martin Lee, he founds Feast. He's helping people, and actually he runs into an Eddie Brock who has lost venom and is dying of cancer. And due to Martin Lee's touch, Eddie Brock's cancer is cured, and some leftover symbiote remains are still in his bloodstream, and that actually creates anti-venom. So for those of you who miss using that symbiotes team that were so good back in the day in Marvel Strike Force, anti-venom's actual origin comes from Mr. Negative, which is pretty cool. So yeah. Addiction to bioweapons. This is an opinion of mine, all right? Mr. Negative really likes to use drugs in his schemes, right? So like a lot of your Sinister Six characters, a lot of your Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery, they've got these like different things they do to just kind of like put stuff out, like there, sometimes there's drugs, sometimes there's different bioweapons. They like to use different robots. Mr. Negative just really likes to use drugs on people. So just a few examples. Also, once again, he also does this in the Spider-Man video game I talked about earlier. I'm going to keep referencing the video game. Namely, we talking about comics here, but in this situation, Mr. Negative's story is fairly well represented, in my opinion, in the Spider-Man video game. So, some drugs listed, but are not limited to D-Lite, which, that's how he gets his powers, obviously. And it's a type of heroin. Devil's Breath, which is the drug in question. It's in the comics and it's in the video game. Devil's Breath is an encoded DNA drug that, when exposed to it, if you are of whatever that encoded DNA is, you die. Right, so he legitimately kills families, and what he's looking for is like these dynasty crime lords, or these dynasty like organizations, right? That are, they pass, their son becomes the next crime lord or whatever. So he usually will encode Devil's Breath, and that will kill them. And it also has some hallucinogenic effects. And then also he has used a drug called Shade, which essentially is his power as a drug. So he can either use it to control people like his power, or he can use it to make his power last longer on a person, right? So Mr. Negative, he's inherently powerful. He can control multiple people, legitimately conjure an army just by essentially walking around and touching people. He can, to the point where he can even control superheroes, and also he uses drugs to make it more like potent, which is just kind of nuts. All right, so relatives and relationships. Mr. Negative is actually so he doesn't have a name. He doesn't have a family. He kind of operates on his own. As a person who is, as Martin Lee, very forgiving, very loving. Mr. Negative, always having people around him because he wants to be that crime organization. He wants to be the head of this organization, but actually keeps very little to no relationships. Yana Lee being his fake wife. Martin Lee's real Martin Lee's real wife. So it's his fake Martin Lee, Mr. Negative's fake wife. And he keeps her around, and until she ends up getting killed, in being like extorted and such, trying to figure out who Mr. Negative really is, because Mr. Negative also Mr. Negative is Martin Lee, gets really involved into politics and trying to affect politics and stuff, so he gets a lot of reporters on him. There's an awful lot of politics involved with Mr. Negative. He really likes to get in there. That Underworld team's actually a really good spot for him, because that's a big thing that Mr. Negative likes to do. He runs the crime organizations, but also he wants to run politics. Very similar objectives in that kind of way as Kingpin, and you'll see he kind of has runs in with Kingpin recently in the comics. So notable events, Revenge. So in Revenge, this is what happens. So with Martin Lee, we're gonna call him Martin Lee from now on, okay? So just to avoid confusion, he goes by Martin Lee. His name's Martin Lee, but he's not actually Martin Lee. But for the sake of sakes, Martin Lee, when he was in China, he was forced into working in a crime family by a villain named Silver Fang, right? So as Martin Lee is kind of existing as Mr. Negative and becoming a crime lord, whatever, he hears tell from resources in Shanghai in China that Silver Fang has kind of turned a new leaf. He's become this big humanitarian, and he goes by the name of, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, I apologize ahead of time, Shen Qing Hao, and he's become quite a big deal for his selflessness, and he's going to receive a humanitarian award. And Mr. Negative is like, F that, that's the guy who screwed up my life. Everything that's bad that's happened to me is because of him. That guy's gonna die. So he's like, I feel like he really overcomplicated this, but you know, comics. So he's like, I'm gonna make this guy pay by making an army here in the United States, and I'm gonna get, essentially, we're gonna call them super siblings or something, but he was like, I'm gonna get Cloak and Dagger, and I'm gonna freaking mind control them so that I have like these rooks, my left and right people, right, that are just gonna be ridiculously strong. So he goes and he attempts to kind of control them with his negative touch. Totally does it. Totally works out. He captures Cloak and Dagger. And he, you know, goes to, he kind of gets his little army. Also, another thing Mr. Negative uses is he's got these inner demons, which are these demons that he manifests in a physical form that kind of fight for him. So not only can he use humans or superhumans as these this army, but he can also use these inner demons who are just essentially embodiments of his negative dark force energy. So he's got this army, and he's like, I'm going to Shanghai to, we're gonna go take this guy. What they're trying to do is, instead of like killing him, they're trying to have him expose himself on camera that, hey, I'm a big crime boss, and I killed a lot of people, and I ruined a lot of people's lives. So he's trying to use that aforementioned drug shade to kind of just have him negatively controlled, you know, and admit his faults, admit his past on the stage of the humanitarian awards or whatever. But lo and behold, because of pure comics and coincidence, we find out that Peter Parker, the CEO of Parker Industries, a tech conglomerate that he founds, is the person giving the award to Shen. And Mr. Negative, not knowing Peter Parker is Spider-Man, spoiler alert, turns out when we find out Peter Parker's given the award, it's not revealed immediately that he's Spider-Man. For those of you in the back that aren't keeping up, we find out that Peter Parker's actually Spider-Man after Mr. Negative and Cloak and Dagger go to him, and he's like, yo, I'm gonna touch you and you're gonna do what I want, and what I want you to do is give shade to this guy so that when he gets up there he says this stuff. And Peter Parker's like, yeah, I'll do that. And then he gets away and he's like, I'm Spider-Man and I've already been controlled, so you can't control me with that anymore. Because the more Mr. Negative uses his power on a person, it kind of wears off because they get sort of acclimated to it. So he tries to control Spider-Man unknowing it's Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's like, yeah, nah, bro, I'm just gonna play along and not actually do that. So then Silver Fang, ex-Silver Fang Shen, gets up in front of everybody. Mr. Negative's like, haha, I won, check this out. And then he doesn't admit his faults or whatever in front of the world. And then obviously Mr. Negative's like, well, we're not going to do that. So Mr. Negative goes on the offense. He goes to attack. He's gonna, you know, touch him and make him do it. But then it turns out, surprise, surprise, that Spider-Man has already planned for this. He has a SWAT team on standby to fight back against all of, essentially, the army. And they have guns that are loaded with anti-negative antidote that he's made, like an anti-shade thing. And so he shoots the first thing to do with this, one of them shoots Cloak, so Cloak becomes good again, and then Cloak's like, all right, great, and then he, gets Dagger back. They all fight, blah, 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 blah. Mr. Negative's defeated. Woohoo, yay. And then he ends up kind of slipping away in Shanghai, and Cloak and Dagger are like, we're going to stay here, and we're going to find everybody that did negative things to us, and we're going to fight Mr. Negative here, and blah, 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 blah. So they stay in Shanghai. Boom skis. So that's the revenge and the story of Silverfang. All right, and then the other notable event, this is really recent. It was part of the Sinister War, and the real reason why I actually bring this up, extraordinarily biased, is I really liked reading this. It was a really fun time. It was, but Kindred, who is a reincarnation of a dead Harry Osborn, comes back as this really scary monster dude, and he resurrects a bunch of villains, and he mind controls a bunch of villains by putting centipedes in their heads. And these real creepy. This is super scary, good Halloween time reading. But he like implants these centipedes into people's heads, and he can kind of control them that way. Not the centipedes don't control him. The centipedes essentially will kill them if they have slight control. But ultimately, if they don't do what he wants, the Kindred wants them to do, the centipedes will just eat their brains and they're dead. So Kindred's super powerful. And at a point, there was a supervillain in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery called Sin Eater, and Sin Eater was literally just a guy with a shotgun, and he judged people based on what they did, and if and if they sinned too much, he would cleanse them, and cleanse them means shooting them in the face with a shotgun. So anyway, Kindred brings Sin Eater ends up killing himself. Just Marvel canon, he ends up realizing his own sins, he turns his gun on himself, and he dies, and Kindred brings him back to life and gives him the power of purifying people's negative sides. So sorry, a lot of background without Mr. Negative, but we're getting there. So he essentially, he can purify people's sins, people's malintent. He can kind of revisit them. And so this comes into play, that Jekyll and Hyde situations. This is Sinister War during / right before Dark Reign arc in comics. For those of you who read, keep it up with me here. So ultimately, what happens is Martin Lee, Mr. Negative, whatever, hears about Sin Eater coming back and hears about his essentially being able to purify people, and Martin Lee's like, now's my chance, and he fights and he fights and he fights, and he's able to kind of take over his body from that Mr. Negative, and he legitimately like struggles and fights to get to Sin Eater's like base, just to get purified by Sin Eater. So what you're seeing in the comic panel there is him getting shot by Sin Eater, and in getting shot by Sin Eater, getting Mr. Negative ripped from his body. So this is recent in the comics, by the way. So in that, he's purified, and he's kind of living like a homeless life, but he's loving it. He can do whatever he wants. He's as Martin Lee. He's been arrested a few times, so he's not as strong, or like he's not as popular as he used to be. He's living his best life out on the streets. He actually goes and he becomes one of the people helped by Feast, which is really cool. And he's just really loving himself, really loving life. But as the Sinister War comes to a close, Sin Eater crosses a lot of paths, whatever, and Dr. Octopus is the one that figures out the whole centipede thing. And so Dr. Octopus, they end up being able to, it's him and Spider-Man, they capture Sin Eater, and they get the centipede out of his head, and in doing so, undoes all of the purification that he had done throughout the process, which then makes the negativity come back to Martin Lee. So Martin now is like, oh man, that sucks that happened, but I'm gonna fight it. He's like, I've been without it, I'm strong, I know I can do it. I can do this. And so with the negativity coming back, Martin Lee actually, after having a few like bouts with himself, Martin Lee's able to overcome it, and he comes out the other end and he's like, I'm Martin Lee, this is awesome. And Mr. Negative is dead, except that it's comics, right? So Martin Lee's living his best life in Feast, and then all of a sudden inner demons break in, Mr. Negative's inner demons, they break in and they take over the place, and they hold May Parker hostage, and they're like, yo, this isn't how it's gonna be. You're gonna be part, you're gonna be one with Mr. Negative, or we're gonna kill this lady. And Martin Lee's like, well, I can't let you kill that lady. I can't let you kill May Parker. So he goes outside, and he lets the inner demons take him, and he becomes Mr. Sinister again. Or Mr. Sinister, my bad, Mr. Negative again. And upon doing that and all the ruckus, the police come in, they're like, yo, you're under arrest. That was all you. We know it. You're Mr. Negative anyway. And he's like, yeah, I guess so. But turns out, Kingpin had him on the sly. And it was the arrest was a fake arrest. And it was Kingpin getting Martin Lee to come to his office to be like, yo, I want you to work with me. You and I, two mega crime dudes, we're gonna get in it. And that's pretty close to where we are in the comics right now. So that's his situation with Kindred. That's Martin Lee. That's Mr. Negative. That's some cool stuff there. So next, we are going to talk about power level. So in Marvel Strike Force, there really isn't power scaling, but for the sake of the comics, for the sake of argument, I like power scaling quite a bit. The way we do that here on Frosty Features, multiversal means you are a threat to reality as you know it and as everyone else knows it. It is a well-known thing that if you wanted to end reality, you could. If you wanted to end all the realities around you, you could. All at once. That is a extremely, extremely powerful being. Overly godlike. It's a god's god, if you will. Universal, you can end your reality, or then maybe skip over to another dimension or timeline and end their reality. Cosmic means that you are a threat to a planetary body, and with a little bit of effort, you can run around to some other planets or whatever. Maybe take out a solar system or a small galaxy. Nuclear means you have the power of a nuclear bomb. You are a threat to small cities and up to a planetary body. City is the most common power level in the Marvel Universe. Good examples of city power heroes are going to be like your Daredevils, your Spider people. So your strength is essentially equivalent to that of being able to take out a brick wall. Therefore, with enough effort, maybe taking out a whole building or taking out a city block with enough try. And finally, we've got Greg. Greg is the undead Asgardian that Hela spawns in Marvel Strike Force. And for the sake of argument, we're saying that Greg is a human strength, just a regular old human. That means I, myself, as I stand here, can use a large 20-sided dice and some large sunglasses and beat the heck out of Greg and beat him to death because he is only as strong as a human, which that is about where I'm at. And that's, you know, Asgardians, whatever, but for the sake of argument, Greg is human level. And in the case of Mr. Negative, unlike most of Spider-Man's rogues gallery, I argue that Mr. Negative is of a nuclear power level. A couple of indications of that power. Not only does he have mass influence over a large amount of people with his power, there is also a point where he punches Spider-Man through 2 buildings at the same time, kind of leveling the buildings. So that already puts him at the high end of city, being able to do that with little effort. But also, that's just him on his own. Him controlling large amounts of people and things like that legitimately give him the ability to take over large areas quickly. So his influence by his powers can overcome cities in, hours. So on a nuclear level, Mr. Negative's quite strong. His inner demons give him that other extra kind of bounce, and then also, him creating, the symbiote like Anti-Venom, another just strong enough on its own superhero that, Eddie Brock uses to defeat Venom, who is also an extremely high level, city level, villain, anti-hero, whatever. Yeah, so that is Frosty Features Mr. Negative. I hope that you all enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments down below what you think, or if I missed something that you wish I would have pointed out. Mr. Lee's got an awful lot, I said it earlier, a lot of political stuff, a lot of underworld goodness. So let me know in the comments what you think. Like, subscribe, share, please. Also, as a reminder, I stream on Twitch at the link above on Sundays at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time. When my internet's working better, I'm always on, but as of today, here we are offline, but that's cool. We still got this knocked out. Please like and share. I hope that you all have a fantastic, fantastic day, and most importantly, y'all, stay cool.